name is Daniil Gataulin. I'm one of the senior research analysts covering biotech here at Chardan, where our vision is to help identify companies with high potential for investment returns based on creating real value for society through disruptive innovation. It is my pleasure to introduce Kerrie Brady, the CEO of OcuTerra Therapeutics, and Bill Steinkrauss, the CFO, to our virtual ophthalmology summit, where the initial focus is on AMD and diabetes-related ocular diseases. Kerrie, Bill, welcome.
Thank you. Delighted to be here.
Thanks for having us.
My pleasure. To start things off, could you please provide a brief overview of OcuTerra and perhaps highlight some of the recent milestones?
Sure. So OcuTerra is an ophthalmology-focused biotech company. We're based in Boston, and we have our initial program, the OTT-166, which we'll tell you about in a moment, currently in phase 2 in the DREAM study, which is focused on diabetic retinopathy early active management. We are a small team. We're very capital efficient, and with the Series B raise that we did at the end of 2021, we've been able to build out our team, design, and implement our clinical trial. And recent milestone highlights. Just recently, we announced full enrollment in the DREAM study. That's basically on time for the program, so certainly a very positive signal of the team's ability to execute on trial enrollment. And we are looking forward to our next major milestone, which will be in the first half of next year, is announcing those phase 2 top-line results.
Excellent. Thank you for that overview. So as you mentioned, your lead asset is OTT-166 to target diabetic retinopathy, especially in the earlier stages, utilizing the non-invasive approach. So before we get into the molecule and the mechanism and all of that, can you explain what is the current standard of care for this group of patients, and why do you believe that they would benefit from a treatment like this?
Yeah, so firstly to clarify that 166 is not only non-invasive, it's a local treatment. It's actually an eye drop, which we have shown in phase 1b studies in patients, the ability to reach the retina and have biological effect. Now, the current standard of care for patients with diabetic retinopathy, if they do not yet have impaired vision or have a vision-threatening complication such as diabetic macular edema, the standard of care is watch and wait. So relying on the patient getting regular eye exams to pick up progression of the disease. And then when a threatening complication such as diabetic macular edema occurs or the vision starts to deteriorate, at that stage, they're referred to a retina specialist for an anti-VEGF injection or laser therapy. So essentially, the vast majority of patients with this chronic progressive disease are really managed by watch and wait. So
Got it.
It would benefit.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. Therefore, instead of watchful waiting or active surveillance, active management with a non-invasive product is really something that matches the market need out there.
Got it. And I guess part of the reason is the patients themselves being resistant, right, to accepting those more invasive treatments when they have been diagnosed with diabetic retinopathy. Based on your market research, do you think these patients would be open to early treatment, non-invasive treatment, even if they are asymptomatic?
Oh, most definitely. We have had quite some interaction with patients. We're actually making sure we have patient input into the design of our clinical trials, as well as understanding their journey and the issues that they are dealing with going forward. So most definitely, they want something that can actually do something. We hear from them and from clinicians we talk with. When a patient is diagnosed, first they say, look, is there anything that we can do? They're told at the moment, no, we can just watch and wait, watch it progress. And then once a problem occurs, we'll go in and treat that problem. So yes, there's an overwhelming desire to have a local non-invasive treatment for this large patient population.
Got it. And could you please break down the market, the diabetic retinopathy market for us? How big it is overall, And then how many or what percentage of those actually do get more invasive treatments, and what percent would actually be addressable by OTT-166?
Yeah, so actually there's around, in the US, there's around about now 10 million patients who have diabetic retinopathy. There was just recently an updated report published showing that. And of those, probably about 1 million are those who have the complication of diabetic macular edema. There's about 9 million patients in that watch and wait category there, so that's a lot. Around half of them are in the moderate to moderately severe group, and another half are in the mild group. So the rate of progression accelerates as you get to the more severe stages of diabetic retinopathy. So, it can progress pretty quickly, for example, in patients with moderately severe to severe diabetic retinopathy. We know from previous studies around about a quarter of them in as little as 6 months will progress to develop a complication such as macular edema that requires them to get intravitreal injection.
Got it. So I guess up to this point, anti-VEGFs have been dominating the diabetic eye disease space, and now we are starting to see some additional mechanism of actions. Can you talk about the role of integrin, which is the mechanism that OTT-166 is utilizing? What exactly is its function or role in diabetic retinopathy?
Sure, and it's fascinating in that integrins as a family is a very large family. There's about 24 different subtypes of integrins. And what we know for diabetic retinopathy, there's a subgroup called the RGD binding integrins, and there's 7 of them that are 7 of the 8 that are really important for the disease progression with that. And we also know that integrins, they're called integrins because they're integrators of cell signaling. They, pick up what's going on in the environment and sort of control and manage what's going on in the cell. So just a disturbance in the cellular environment, such as high glucose levels, for example, in diabetes, starts them signaling, hey, we've got to do something here to deal with this. So the group of integrins that OTT-166 targets, blocking them, addresses the signaling of the downstream signaling of known agents such as VEGF, the VEGF-R receptor. There's also the fibrosis or FGF receptor and several others that we know drive not only the angiogenesis or the neovascularization and the leakage and the inflammation and the fibrosis that are all important components of this disease, but it does it by stopping the signaling inside the cell. So, for example, unlike the anti-VEGF therapies, which, by the way, are wonderful development, was one of the most important developments in ophthalmology in recent times. Before that, there was nothing that could be done for these patients. So that's fantastic development. But because of the risk-benefit of an injection, it doesn't support its use earlier on. Anyway, with the anti-VEGF current injections, they rely on basically mopping up or blocking the VEGF from hitting its receptor. With the integrin, even if the VEGF is hitting its receptor, it cannot signal. And likewise, these other receptors, so multiple growth receptors, signaling is turned off by the integrin. That's a very different approach. In some ways, Bill might even have his newcomer to the company in the story, a more elegant way of summarizing this, but it's like VEGF plus. So we do have some anti-VEGF activity, but we also have these other additional benefits, particularly on inflammation and fibrosis. So Bill, what's your characterization on this?
I think that's what is so exciting, is that the mechanism is novel, but it's a combination, or it's not a combination, but it's hitting multiple targets, some of which are known to have demonstrated clear clinical impact of such as VEGF. But in addition to that, so it is really VEGF plus, and I think that's what's really exciting. In addition to the novel route of administration as being a topical here, not requiring injections or even oral exposure to patients.
Got it. And what do you see its potential utilization in other eye conditions?
Oh yes, there is significant potential We know that integrins play an important role in other retinal diseases, age-related macular degeneration, for example. But we've chosen to focus on diabetic retinopathy as the initial indication for this program for a number of very good reasons. Obviously, there's a large unmet need here, untreated patient population that is looking for treatment and non-invasive treatment. It also is, aligned very well with the profile of the product, being an eye drop delivery. So that's the initial point. As a single agent, first-line therapy is what we're targeting. Beyond that, there are a number of other potential indications as a standalone or even potentially as an add-on therapy. For example, in diabetic macular edema, that too is treated by a repeated course of intravitreal injections. Maybe adding on OTT-166 could not only improve the degree of efficacy that you're seeing, but maybe increase the duration between injections that are needed. Similarly, in age-related macular degeneration. But they're all things to focus on in the future.
Got it. Excellent. And let's move on to OTT-166 itself. Can you talk about what that molecule is specifically, what its mechanism of action is?
Sure. So it's a new molecular entity that we call purpose engineered, so specifically designed so that it has the physicochemical characteristics that allows it to penetrate through the ocular tissue to get to the retina. Now, when we've done our PK and PD studies and looked at the profile, it indicates that it reaches the retina from a so-called transscleral route. So, once the eye drop goes in, essentially it goes around and soaks in, into the eye and then reaches in through the layers with that. It doesn't have to work all its way through the front with that. And the molecule is able to do that because it has the right balance of lipophilicity, charge, solubility, etc. So we going into designing the molecule, particularly looking at selective fluorination that can dial in the desired characteristics for us. We're able to do that. And in the process, maintain the selectivity and actually increase the potency somewhat. So it was a very, very elegant design of the new molecule.
Got it. And is it all, is all the secret sauce in the molecule itself, or is there anything or some additional attributes to the, formulation that allows it to penetrate into retina space?
I like the secret sauce. I like to say the magic is in the molecule. Yeah, it's not a fancy formulation. It's a very straightforward formulation. It really is the design of the molecule. And one of the key things too is because of the high solubility, it's actually a 5% concentration, which is quite high for an eye drop. And that allows us to deliver a lot of drug that gets to the retina at the end of the day. We're showing in our preclinical models, 200 times the IC50 maintained for at least 12 hours after the drop is delivered.
Got it. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about some of the data that you saw so far. I believe you published results from a phase 1b study last year. Can you walk us through that study and what did the data show?
Yeah, the top headline, two headlines of what the data showed is number one, it's not only safe, but it was also very well tolerated. Obviously, this is a first in human study, although it was done in patients, and safety, of course, but tolerability too. It did not sting, it doesn't burn, it doesn't turn your eyes red. That's a really important thing for an eye drop therapy that's being developed as a chronic treatment. So that was important. But the biggest news was that we did demonstrate robust biological activity, showing that the molecule was able to get to the retina and have an important biological effect. So the study was done in 44 patients who had diabetic retinopathy but had already had a vision-threatening complication, the diabetic macular edema. We were only able at that time to do studies that were 4-week duration. And so patients who had that swollen macula, we would expect if we were getting activity to see a reduction in that macula within that period of time. And we did. We saw 35% of the patients were responders to that treatment, which was only for 4 weeks, 1 drop twice a day, and quite a significant outcome to be seen there. We also noticed that in the second part of the study, where patients were simply observed, no further treatment was given, that the treatment benefit was maintained and actually improved. And that's quite intriguing to note that one of our hypotheses about this is that this is due to the mechanism of action here. It's not simply that we're attacking one particular target and when the pressure goes off, like all the VEGF comes back, and there's something happening because we're interplaying a number of growth factors. Maybe there's some receptor downregulation, etc. So that's a very important thing to note from that. So Bill, anything else you would add to that?
Yeah, well, I think also we did learn a lot in terms of, some of the patients who were more likely to respond, and we made sure to implement that into our design of the phase 2. And I think further, we took the phase 2 study and made sure that the design was something that would correlate well into a phase 3. And that's what I think is really exciting about the current study, is that it's clearly a large study, but it's really well designed with the intention of being a significant de-risking event for investors and shareholders and hopefully for patients.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned you identified some of the factors that the responders share.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of those factors?
Yeah, so one of the key things is there was much higher response rates in those who were anti-VEGF naive, so they hadn't been treated previously with an intravitreal anti-VEGF injection, and they tended to be a bit earlier in their disease. And that is exactly the population that we're looking at for our phase 2 and indeed our phase 3 studies. So that being VEGF naive and early in the disease process, there was a lot higher likelihood of response in the patient groups.
Got it. And in terms of dosing, what regimen did you arrive at?
So in the phase 2 study, we tested 2.5% versus the 5% given twice a day. What we're taken into the phase 2 study was 2 dose levels. One is twice a day, and then we'll take it up to a higher dose level that's 4 times a day.
Got it. Okay. Anything else about the phase 2 design that came from the phase 1 learnings?
Yes, I think one of the key things is making sure that we're expanding the diagnostics or the what we're looking at with regards to endpoints beyond just the standard regulatory fundus photographs. So we're including some of the latest technologies, OcuTerra, for example, looking at not just the regulatory endpoint of what's happening in that little 7-figure field in the middle, but what's also happening in the periphery as well. So we can get more information about potential, biomarkers or anatomic markers that may help us stratify future studies with that, and maybe have some, guidance on patients who are more likely to respond with that. They're the key things I think that came out of the phase 1b for us.
Mm-hmm. So what is the primary endpoint, and at what time point are you going to be looking at?
Yeah, Bill.
Yeah, so from a primary endpoint, we'll be using a 2-step reduction in the DRSS score. But unlike the phase 1b, this will be dosing over 6 months, so it will be a 24-week time point for that. That's the primary endpoint, in addition to the secondary endpoints that Kerrie mentioned, which include prevention of progression to a vision complicating treatment, as well as some of the exploratory secondary markers that we could gain a lot of information from. And that primary endpoint is something that is well established as a regulatory endpoint, accepted regulatory endpoint in this space, and would be the expectation to be the same endpoint for the phase 3, but just expecting to use a later endpoint, such as 12 months as opposed to 6.
Got it. And in terms of the current status of the trial, so you had a milestone just last week, I believe, right?
Mhm.
You completed
Yeah.
enrollment in the trial, so congratulations. So
Thank you.
in terms of the next steps, can you remind us what they will be and when will you have any initial data readouts?
Yeah, David.
Yeah,
Bill.
that's all right. Yeah, so we were really excited that we announced full enrollment, and I think it's really a testament to the team in terms of their ability to execute. Again, this is a small team with limited financing to date, that we were very capital efficient. We enrolled the whole study in about a year. We over-enrolled the study to 225 patients. So now that that last patient was dosed, we have 6 months from that point. So we would expect to be able to lock our database and have initial results in Q1 next year.
Got it. And yeah, in terms of the ideal case scenario for the data, what would you consider to be a home run?
Oh, well, certainly, achieving statistical significance on our primary endpoint, which is a regulatory endpoint, with that is key. That's a home run. But also clinically, what's important is, delaying the progression of these vision-threatening complications, delaying the need to have a invasive intervention going forward. So that's a home run. And of course, it's a given that home run is that we continue to see the excellent safety and tolerability profile of the program. One other thing that we're doing in the trial is we're also watching and monitoring very closely patient compliance as well, to ensure that patients are taking their study medication as required. And surprisingly, very, very, very high levels of compliance in this study. Very pleased to see that that's being continued. And certainly that seems is a testament to the patients willing to commit to something that will preserve their sight. And so that is something that's very important that we'll be continuing to monitor as well.
Got it. And with respect to safety, so great to hear that no safety signals have been identified to this point, and hopefully it continues that way. But in terms of the MOA, what is and I imagine there are many roles for integrins in within the eyes. Do you potentially, what are potential complications that from blocking this or from affecting this pathway, especially when you treat it long term?
Yeah, I think that we have very good data from our 6-month animal studies that we've done with topical delivery, very high doses, 2 different species, and they're extremely clean. So, we're not seeing problems, which with any eye drop in particular, not just an integrin, but with any eye drop, anything that irritates the cornea can be a problem. That there has been some other attempts at developing eye drop delivery for the retina, and they've been stalled because you get some corneal toxicity there, unfortunately. So that's a sort of must-have, well-tolerated, but safety for the front of the eye as well as the back of the eye. Mechanistically, there's no real major concerns that we know of, that the selective integrins that that we target, given that yes, integrins are involved in a wide range of integrins, and there's no reason to believe that there'll be, I guess, an unexpected safety signal you don't believe is going to happen. But based on the science, the data we have so far, there's certainly no areas of particular concern. Actually, on the flip side of that, one of the areas that's going to be fascinating to see is the ability to prevent fibrosis from occurring, because this is the result, like a callus, like long-term irritation and the formation of fibrosis in the retina. It does take place over time. If we can avoid that as well, it's a major additional benefit for the product.
Got it. Makes sense. Okay, I have a couple more questions. Before we end the session. First on finances, and you commented on the operational efficiency of the company. What is how well funded are you, and what do you expect your current cash position to carry you through?
Yeah, so we've been working to extend our cash runway, but But right now, we expect that we have significant cash or sufficient cash to get through this upcoming data readout, which is, we feel a significant de-risking for the asset and a big value catalyst for the company, which is why it's been so important to make sure that we have been capital efficient so that we can ensure that we're not, forced into the market to try to raise capital prior to this data.
And who are some of the key investors?
Yeah, I think we've done a nice job. This company does have a bit of a longer history, but when Kerrie was brought in, we did recapitalize the company, and we have not disclosed kind of our investor base to date.
Okay, that's fair. And I guess we'll live on one last question that I like to end those sessions with. What do you believe investors are missing or not fully appreciating about OcuTerra story?
Our current investors really appreciate the OcuTerra story. I think, I'm not being facetious, but I mean, it's been a very capital efficient, rapid movement forward to, developing, significant value milestones going forward with that. I think that in the area of diabetic retinopathy generally, I think investors should realize that this is, a growing wave of problem. We really do have a diabetes epidemic, not only here in the US, but around the world, India, China, etc. They have growing problems here. And diabetic retinopathy in type 2 diabetics occurs in around about a third, if not more, of those patients. This is a large number of patients in a growing population. So the size of that market and the need is growing. But in parallel with that, there's a really tremendous development in the use of, AI for diagnosis and monitoring of patients with diabetic retinopathy. They may or may not be aware that the very first FDA-approved AI diagnostic was for machine learning for diabetic retinopathy. It's a read of the retina, like behind me, how many spots and blocks are there, that has now been digitized and can be done. So that means that a patient, teleretinopathy is already in play, and that the devices that are used to scan the retina without even having to dilate the pupil are getting smaller and smaller and getting into the hands not only of optometrists, but also primary care and diabetologists. So our ability to identify these patients earlier, give them earlier treatment, is rapidly expanding going forward. So that's an important thing to note about diabetic retinopathy opportunity. And within that, OcuTerra, a very focused, very productive company that is, not too far away from a significant announcing top-line results and a significant valuing.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for that, and thank you for joining our summit. Really appreciate you having you here. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.